Yeah,
So, one of his executive orders, Donald Trump, was to officially recognize two sexes, two genders, like as one thing. They are, one is essentially just a self-perception, one is a fact. We deal with the facts, and that's the fact, basically. So I thought we'd talk about this just generally because, of course, news as a whole is, of course, inundated with the Trump stuff at the moment. There is no media news at all. We were quite hard pressed to get all of the news that we did for this show, to be honest. But this was quite a fascinating thing because culture is downstream of politics, of course, and it drip feeds into media. Loads of people may question what's the relevance to this. Well, quite a big relevance, to be honest. I mean, America is the global powerhouse. Politics of America affects geopolitics worldwide. If you don't know that, you're ignorant or just dumb. I don't really know what to tell you. It's super important. So whoever leads America, if they start doing things like this, it has ramifications across the entire world. And this is quite a big thing. So the title of it is Defending Women from Gender Ideology, Extremism, and Restoring Biological Truth to the Federal Government. I mean, it's pretty full on. So what is it? So just a real quick one, Across the country, ideologues who deny the biological reality of sex have increasingly used legal and other socially coercive means to permit men to self-identify as women and gain access to intimate single-sex spaces and activities designed for women, from women's domestic abuse shelters to women's workplace showers. This is wrong. Efforts to eradicate the biological reality of sex fundamentally attack women by depriving them of their dignity, safety, and well-being. The erasure of sex in language and policy has a corrosive impact not just on women, but on the validity of the entire American system. Basing federal policy on truth is critical to scientific inquiry, public safety, morale, and trust in government. This unhealthy road is paved by an ongoing and purposeful attack against the ordinary and long-standing use and understanding of biological and scientific terms, replacing the immutable biological reality of sex with an internal, fluid, and subjective sense of self, unmoored from biological facts. Invalidating the true and biological category of women improperly transforms laws and policies designed to protect sex-based opportunities into laws, policies that undermine them. And basically just goes through and says, what is it? Well, sex shall refer to an individual's immutable biological classification. Sex is not a synonym for and does not include the concept of gender identity. Like, it's real. I actually really like how they've done this. Like the way this is probably the best way you could do it. It's very common sense, but still it is the best way you could do it. Women or woman and girls or girl shall mean adult and juvenile human female. Same for men. Female means a person belonging at conception to the sex that produces the large reproductive cell. Male, the opposite of that. And then they even go into stating what gender ideology is. So gender ideology replaces the biological category of sex with an ever-shifting concept of self-assessed gender identity, permitting the false claim that males can identify as and thus become women and vice versa, requiring all institutions of society to regard this false claim as true. Gender ideology includes the idea that there is a vast spectrum of genders that are disconnected from one sex. Gender ideology is internally inconsistent in that it diminishes sex as an identifiable or useful category, but nevertheless maintains that it is possible for a person to be born in the wrong sex body, gender identity, etc., etc., etc. There you go. I mean, I just thought this was really, really interesting. And it's good, obviously. This is a fucking clown show that the West has had to do this. Obviously, this is mental. Like, it's. I can't stress how retarded it is that a president has to do this. Everyone should be ashamed of themselves. This is pathetic, right? It's so incredibly dumb, but that's where we're at, right? Yeah, it took a president to do. I mean, it's so dumb. And yet, in the UK, our prime minister and other people are like, oh yeah, men can be women and women can, men can grow uteruses. And that's what I think that David Lammy said. A men can grow a fucking uterus. What a twat. There should be an IQ test for getting in government. I'm so sick of morons being politicians. They're imbeciles. They've got no right leading the country just because they got voted in. No,
Well, I also think they shouldn't be already
limit
compromised
on intellect.
sovereignty. You know, because they also should not be compromised to sacrifice your sovereignty. That means that people like the great and powerful Starmer and others would not be in positions of authority in government. I think that you're already at odds with. Well, I don't know what you guys have. We have a constitution. You have like some like person with a crown or some shit. I don't know. Anyway, I'm just kidding, guys. But the whole point is like, you know, governing documents need to be, you know, actually like respected. And I feel like you guys, you really right now in your country, you're subjected at mayoral levels to WEF adherence. You have nothing but a government full of WEF future leaders, people in your government, mayors, et cetera, et cetera. So
yeah. I mean, let's not talk about the depressing UK. Let's talk about the US, where you guys have had a president that now may influence the world. What do you guys think of this? Bo, let's go to you first. What do you reckon of this?
I mean, you used the word common sense at one point there. Yeah, absolutely. It's embarrassing for the entire Western civilization that we're reduced to something like this, that anything like this needs to be said. Right. Okay. Of course, there are being a true hermaphrodite, someone that actually suffers from a true intersex condition. Okay, that exists, but it's a tiny number of people where that's the case. So all this gender fluid stuff, it's just commie subversion 101. It's just anything that will throw a spanner in the works of Western civilization and our homogenous society. Anything that undermines us or weakens us. That's all it is. And so, yeah, thank God that some sort of common sense at the highest level. And you're absolutely right, Nate, what you said about that. It really matters what direction America goes, because it's an old cliche, and it goes back to post-war consensus that America sneezes and the rest of the world gets a cold. Yeah, it really matters. The people in Europe might not like to admit this to themselves, but it is true that America is the hegemon of the world, certainly the Western world. And so it matters where they lead. A lot of culture will follow. And so this perverse notion that a man can just say he's a woman now and you have to accept that he is a woman, or the other way around. And yeah, the net result of it, other than perverting and subverting our societies, is that it makes actual women less safe in all sorts of ways, which is revolting. There's absolutely no need for it, no call for it. I've used the word perverse. That's exactly what it is. And so thank you, Donald, for doing something like this. Thank you. It's just common sense. And as you say, Nate, I couldn't agree more. It's an embarrassment that we've been reduced to where something like this has to be done and said. There you go. That's my take.
No, I agree. I agree wholeheartedly. It's almost demoralizingly embarrassing, isn't it? Like it's good. I'm all for it. Good, well done. I'm like, fuck.
Yeah,
really?
oh God, no, I'll take it. Now we found ourselves in this dark place. I'll take it. As I say, thank you. It's long overdue.
Yeah, just so pathetic, honestly. I can't wait to see what happens, though, because again, as we say, the ramifications of this, like what's going to happen worldwide now. Because I reckon there's two ways it will go. Because again, we're dealing with ideologues now. There's two ways it will go. We'll start to follow suit, or they'll double down hard. Really hard.
The latter. They're going to double down really hard.
I'm going to tell you right now, if you guys accept digital currency, you're done.
Well, they've already brought in digital driver's license. Do you see this, Bo?
Yeah.
You want to reject that shit as soon as you can.
It's
you guys are going to have to push back. It's bad.
You're absolutely right, Culture. I wouldn't for a second say that anything you're saying is wrong, but it's not necessarily always a case of just when these things are pushed on you from top down, right? So, for example, let's say the EU and the Bank of International Settlements and the European Bank, all these things, and your own national government just impose it upon everyone. Like, what can you do? I mean, an example might be something like prohibition in the United States in the 20th century. Okay, most people didn't want that, and it resulted in some sort of a giant explosion of organized crime or anything. But it was forced on you from above, right? Unless you're actually going to march on your capital and some paramilitaries remove the government by force. You have some sort of Bolshevik revolution type thing. Short of that, what can the normal average person do, especially if you've got a family to raise or whatever? It's all well and good for young men with packed full of testosterone and not much to lose, but when it requires an entire population more or less to rise up as one, that's very difficult. I mean, some people say that populism itself is a delusion, that it's never really happened. Dr. Parvini, Academic Agents, talked about the sort of thing. I don't entirely agree with him. Nevertheless, there is at least a kernel of truth, if not more, to it. That it's very, very difficult for a populist pushback on something like that, when your national government, who basically have a monopoly on force, a monopoly on power, are you going to fight back against a militarized police force? You're going to fight if they put the military on the streets. Are you going to fight back against that and win? Not likely. I completely agree with culture. If I had any say in it, the whole idea of having a digital currency would be off the table immediately. But when these things are pushed on you from above by a cabal of people that have got a complete monopoly on state force, what are you going to do?
You mean like the redcoats in the United States?
Well, there are examples like the American Revolution, like the Bolshevik Revolution. I'm not saying it's never, ever happened.
Well, that's populism. I mean, it was at the time. It was a popular thought that, the absence of representation of the authority over them sparked a revolution. I think that's a form of populism. I think the United States in its very formative years early on was a form of populism.
A stripe of it, of course, it was still led by an elite. So by the technical definition of populism, it might have had popular support, of course, like all sorts of things. All sorts of political parties have popular support.
I understand. I understand.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it's never, ever happened.
Right.
I'm saying it's difficult, and in history, it's actually rare.
Well, it gets harder and harder and harder.
Right, and in the modern world, the postmodern world, exactly, Nate, it gets increasingly more difficult. We don't live in the 1770s anymore, where you could form a militia and you might actually be able to defeat a battalion of regular soldiers.
There are other ways.
That's increasingly difficult. Sorry.
There are other ways to fight back against tyranny. They're doing it in China. The young people, they just stop working. Their movement now is let it rot.
Yeah, it's not really done anything though, has it? Let's be honest.
I don't know. That's collapsed their entire housing sector, which is basically the thing that
wasn't just working. That's their loan situation, how they borrow the money to do it. As a debt situation that destroyed their market, to be honest.
Nobody's buying anything anymore. Most people are moving back to the country, or a lot of young people are moving back to the country. There's a lot of things happening there right now. Again, I follow the Chinese stuff every single day. They came out with a massive lie that said their 2024 economy, blew up and did great, except that, it's essentially collapsing. Their infrastructure projects that they've built are falling apart. China's on the verge of disaster, but
I would love that. I would love that to be the case.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's true. I mean, the CCP, when push comes to shove, will just roll the tank over you. Look at Tiananmen Square. I mean, I hope you're right. I don't get me wrong, Culture. I absolutely got everything crossed that that is a correct analysis. Well, we shall see what happens in China. We shall see. But anyway, regardless of the nature of populism and revolts, I'm glad that the Trump White House has come out with this on day one or day two. It's great to see this pushback.
Oh, this was day one.
Yeah, day one. Yeah, we're not even close to done.
Like, God, like 1,000 or something like that. How many executive orders did he sign? It was ridiculous, the amount, wasn't it?
I know it's. I just love to see that Trump's actually following through with a lot of what he says, because it's a classic thing that politicians promise the earth in the campaign and then just don't do it. I mean, Trump was even guilty of it to some small degree first time round in 2016, saying he will prosecute Hillary, and then again on day 1 or 2 saying, actually, it's not, I'm not going to, I've decided now it's not in America's best interest. So the fact that he seems to be following through with loads of this stuff.
Well, the border situation, that's like instant resolve.
One of the things he does is one of the things he did is he removed security clearance from the 50 odd intelligence officials that did that open letter about Hunter Biden's laptop. That's great. That's great.
So good.
They're going to be releasing all the JFK files.
Got my fingers crossed for that big time.
Yeah.
Supposed to
I've made all sorts of content about the John Kennedy murder, so I'm waiting for that one big time.
He did say, didn't he? Said in that interview, Joe Rogan, he was like, "Yeah, well, people aren't going to be happy. There's people alive today that won't be happy, but yeah, I should do it. Just now's the time. Time's to do it, So, we've got another super chat here from Kanan Barnes. It says, ironically, major stores such as Sam's Club in the States is going cashless nationwide by the end of this year. I don't know if Walmart and its other stores around the world will do the same. Yeah, we've got a lot of shops in the UK that are cashless now as well, actually, which is a bit annoying. I don't really like that.
Eventually, everything will be cashless. It's moving in that direction.
I don't like that. Don't like that at all.
Yeah, I don't either. But it's going to happen one day.
I mean, in a way, in a sense, we're already there, in the limited sense that you can get by in the world without cash now, right? But it's when it's the sinister aspect of it, like what we've seen in China, is when they link your ability to have a bank account or to have credit or to actually make purchases in any way, when they link that with your sort of social credit status, right? That's the truly sinister thing. I mean, we already live in a world now where you can easily get by without cash, right?
Yeah,
you got a debit card or a credit card, or you've got your effectively a digital bank account, and you do things online on Amazon or whatever. You don't need cash, right? So we're already there in that sense. But yeah, when it becomes mixed up with power, really social power. I hesitate to use the phrase or the term social justice, but actual real social justice, when the government, the state decide that they're not going to let you have a bank account anymore. They're not going to let you be able to basically operate in society. They're going to be able to dip directly into your bank account, take money away from you for things they've decided you are suddenly guilty of. Right. So you live in a surveillance society where there's security cameras everywhere. They see you do something which you didn't even necessarily know was a crime. They convict you of it in absentia and fine you for it and take the money straight out of your bank account. Stuff like that. Okay, that's when you suddenly realize you're living in a dystopian nightmare.
Yeah.
Right? And the cashless element of it is just one element of it. But it's sort of quite obviously, quite clearly a worrying trend, isn't it? The thin end of the wedge. It was, it can start with something like that, and it's only 1 or 2 steps before you're effectively enslaved.
Yeah, you are. Yeah, 100% you are.
Worrying.
Shotgun fringe. 8,000 Biden pardons. Probably people on Epstein's list,
including all the members of his own family. James Biden.
Yeah.
I did a whole segment on Lotus Eaters about pardons, about the history of presidential pardons, going back to Washington. And there's 1 or 2 exceptions, like Jimmy Carter. Was it Jimmy Carter or Jerry Ford? Can't remember. One of them did sort of. Well, it must have been Ford. Sorry, Jerry Ford did 250,000 pardons.
Jesus.
But that was a one-off fluke. It was to do with Vietnam and people that dodged the Vietnam draft. He basically said, look, we're not going to prosecute all you guys. That's crazy. I'm just going to drop all of that. So there's that one example, and there was one where Harry Truman after World War II did a similar thing, but on a smaller scale. And with one or two exceptions like that, no one has pardoned this many people. And when you look down the list of some of the, not necessarily full pardons, but like some of the when you commute the sentence, he's commuted the sentence of some of the worst criminals you can imagine, like actual just murderers, full-blown multiple murderer people.
Why would you do that?
Yeah, madness. There was this guy, there was this judge in America, right? And it was in a juvenile court, which makes it even more egregious. It was in a juvenile court, and he was sending these kids down to these prisons where it's a sort of a for-profit type prison, you know, where they get the inmates to work, and it makes money. And he sent down thousands of juveniles, and he got kickbacks. He got money for it.
Right.
And he did it to thousands of people, unfairly convicted them. And he eventually got found out and got put on trial himself, and went down for it. Now, in my mind, that's something approaching evil, short of an actual violent crime. I can't think of anything much more despicable than something like that.
You're removing someone's freedom.
Yeah,
like that's brutal.
And Biden pardoned him. And stuff like there's another guy, he was running a vape shop or something, and he was basically poisoning members of his own staff, effectively giving them fentanyl or things against their will, without their knowledge. And stuff. Yeah. It's just some of the worst, some really, really terrible crimes, and he's commuting their sentences and pardoning them and all sorts of stuff.
What was Fauci pardoned for?
Ahead of time. He hasn't even been convicted or tried for anything yet, and he's pardoning him ahead of time. It's madness. And like his own brother and members of his own family, and loads of cops that gave evidence in the January 6th trial, just pardoning them carte blanche ahead of time before they can be.
Well, the only preemptive pardon that I think has been issued, and correct me if I'm wrong, Bo, because you said you just researched this, was with Ford pardoning Nixon, right? Saying the Justice Department isn't going to pursue this. That was likely because he was set up because of the former intelligence officers involved in Watergate. They were clearly doing something either for good or for bad. Regardless, people were not very excited about Nixon for a whole lot of reasons, as far as the industrial war complex that is operating at the time. So it's the same reason why JFK probably got erased from everybody's, timeline. But the that had never been done before, and it hasn't been done since. And there's a lot of questions legally about whether or not that was even effective and or it should have been allowed to have occurred back then, because at the time he hadn't faced any criminal prosecution as of yet, and therefore what is there to pardon? Because we haven't done the extensive amount of legal work required to decide whether you're guilty or innocent in the United States. In this country, you have the right to face your accuser, so that pardon was likely granted the way it was, so that they wouldn't have to put all the accusers on the stand, along with all the other people that were involved in that particular scandal. So there is a decent chance that those preemptive pardons that were granted by this administration are hollow.
I hope so.
And all it takes is the Supreme Court to rule so. And I imagine that the President of the United States, POTUS, will take it to SCOTUS, the Supreme Court of the United States, and get a ruling as soon as possible. I have a feeling you can't preemptively pardon somebody because we don't know what crimes they committed. They've not been
blanket.
It's like, well, so he's out of what is he out of? Any federal crime? So anything that he did federally is all of a sudden null and void. What if he murdered somebody? We don't know. What if it's discovered later? Well, he's pardoned. How so? See, this is the biggest problem with this. And the legal argument will be that where there is no crime or conviction, there should be and is no necessity of a pardon.
Yeah.
And I have a feeling the Supreme Court will find that if it is brought in front of them. And it should be, because right now, there's a lot of accusations flying around about the criminality of the Biden crime family and everything else here in the States. But at the same time, there's nothing there, right?
It's interesting. You've said a number of interesting points there. One of the things I say that the nature of a presidential pardon is that it's a plenipotentiary. It's one of the things which is kind of odd, as I understand it, and I might be wrong because I'm no expert on US jurisprudence, but I think it's sort of cast iron, unless, as you say, the Supreme Court say otherwise, because the Supreme Court have got the final say.
Well,
quite literally, the Supreme Court Chief Justice in the 20th century said the Constitution is whatever the judges say it is. So the buck genuinely does stop with the Supreme Court. So I hope you're right. I think you might be right. I hope you're right that it's a grey area and that the Supreme Court can. But one last thing, if I could just quickly say about Nixon, if anyone wants to go on History Bro, the channel History Bro on YouTube, you'll find an 8-part series all about the Watergate scandal. And the thing with Nixon is that he certainly obviously hadn't been convicted of any legal crime, but he was going to be impeached by the Senate, and that's what Ford was saving him from, not an actual sort of federal crime case. Although the point is that it may have got to, well, it almost certainly would have got to that if he had been impeached by the Senate, which he had the numbers, he was going to get impeached by the Senate, then it would have gone to a criminal prosecution. So
but he still wasn't convicted, and he didn't have to go through the trial. Right. No. And again, there would have been a lot of things thrown back at the federal government and even the intelligence communities, which at the time were aligned with the military industrial complex here in the United States, and especially around the ideas of the forever war movement that was being, perpetuated, in amongst those circles, right? There's a reason why they named airports and military bases after some of these people, because they were responsible for, keeping the war machine running and filling the pockets and purses of people around the globe in order for that to continue. I mean, it seems like we followed the French around at all their failures on a regular here in the United States. And we should have known, because they're French, lots of failure. Anyway, so getting back to it, I'll give you a little piece of hope. At the same time as you're committing federal crimes, you're likely also committing state crimes. And in the case of, mass poisonings or any number of other charges that could be brought, against certain people, the federal pardons don't carry over to states. States can do whatever they want. If you violated a state law, and they did, you got some issues.
Got slightly off topic, kind of.
Sorry about
Bill Dorr sends in £10. Says, in my opinion, a major part of the issue in the UK is so few working class people vote. We've become so demoralised we don't even bother. Only around 60% of UK vote, and working class numbers are always lowest. I actually think it's less than 60%, but it's not just working class; it's the middle classes. Which
their point is, Bill Dorr's point is absolutely valid, though. Sorry, Nate. Sorry, I spoke over you there.
No, I was gonna add that the middle classes are now demoralised as well, because governments have successively tried to destroy the middle class, and they have pretty successfully done that now. The middle class in the UK, you guys in the States, like, classes are quite a big thing in the UK. Basically, it's not so big in the States, but classes are a pretty huge thing in the UK. And COVID saw probably the biggest leveling of finances across the entire country, all in all. Like, people that were poor anyway, so it didn't really do anything with them. People that were rich, it didn't really do anything with them. But it was the middle classes that COVID completely fucked, and it really destroyed the middle classes in the UK. Like, massively. So I agree with you, Bill, but I would just add to that actually the middle classes are demoralised as well. But yeah, go on, Bo. Yeah.
Well, no, I was just going to say, it's always been the case, sort of always, for centuries, one way or another, in Britain, that the working man has had his political voice stymied in all sorts of ways. Other than perhaps you might say in the during the 20th century when there was a labour movement. But now, of course, even that has been completely subverted again, so that the Labour Party is the party of Islam now more than anything else. It's not. It's absolutely not for the way. But when you get a voice like Tommy Robinson, or you get working class people trying to make some sort of waves in reform or something, they're very, very quickly weeded out and demonized. And there's a reckoning at some point. There will have to be a reckoning about all of this. The riots last year, that's not the end of the story.
Yeah, which is, again, I think your guys are in for kind of a, with the incredible influential pressure from the United States, with the social media, starting to have to loosen the purse strings on speech and some other things. I think that the likelihood of a populist government not only rising from within the EU, which we've seen several of those movements starting to be very successful, you end up with, I think you guys mentioned the replacement of the French leader with Le Pen, who I believe has a family history of governance, and then obviously what's happened in Italy. We talked about this Romanian country that is now Romania starting to realize that they've been held down artificially by these world leading globalist asshats. So I have a feeling that you're going to start to see that rise out of the EU. Can that flood from both shores? Certainly. I think once people realize that the incredible civil burden of people who are just illegally in your country and unwanted and unneeded because of the labor pool, then they're nothing but a burden on everybody, including your tax system. I think you're going to see more and more people rise up. Sorry, just the way it is.
Yeah,
I mean, here in the States,
have to be deported.
Yeah, well, here in the United States, I mean, once you get to 17, 18 million people who are not supposed to be here, that have put an incredible burden on every single system that you've put in place. Well, your safety net system is for your citizenry, not for the world's the world's discarded. Yeah, that's my point. So our safety nets have already been stretched. When you have FEMA giving people $700 to live on, instead of like helping to, house them and replace their stuff and everything else, which is what they're supposed to be there for, instead handing that budget over to illegals. I mean, we've had huge problems here in the States. And I think that we all just collectively got very tired of it. 70% of the population said, you suck. And if you're not going to protect how we vote in this country with with a state issued physical identification, then guess what? You're going to go. And that's only going to expand.
Culture in the UK is we don't have someone that has a pair of balls to address those situations. Actually, we have but Nigel Farage that is capitulating to a lot of those situations. So you're lucky that you have a figure like Trump that has come out and just addressed it head on and said what everyone is saying down the bar or at work and stuff like that. We actually don't have someone that has said that. So
yes, but I believe
the UK's, no, let me speak. The UK's political system doesn't allow for someone just to randomly rise up that goes, yeah, I'm going to do this. Actually, I'm going to say it. Like, it is either reform or nothing, and reform is led by weak source Nigel Farage. So we're still a bit screwed no matter what, unfortunately. And Bo will agree. Like, that's just, well, I'm sure you will. I'm not going to speak for you. Like, I would imagine you'll probably agree with that.
Let Culture go if he's going to say something else. But
no, it's just I have a sense in your country that there are people that are rising up that are influential. You have some celebrities that have been advocating upon everybody's behalf.
That matter. It's political parties that matter, and we've only got reform. That's literally it. That's what I'm trying to say to you.
Yeah, and hopefully in the next few years, we will get a Trump type figure around which a true working class or populist movement can arise. At the moment, the best we've got is Nigel, and he's, in my opinion anyway, revealing himself to be a containment project. Maybe someone like Robert Lowe. Who knows what will happen in the future, right? The future is not for us to see. Who knows where it will go? But yeah, at some point, you can only force the lid on the pressure cooker for so long. Just at the moment, we haven't got a Trump type figure hasn't emerged exactly in Britain yet. But I mean, you know, who knows what the future holds? But
yeah.